Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. I hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering a character I'm calling the Librarian, which is going to maximize one of the most powerful things you can possibly be doing in Baldur's Gate, and one that sees surprisingly little discussion in build guides and general strategy guides for the game. I'm talking about scrolls. Scrolls in Baldur's Gate 3 are incredibly powerful. Why settle for the best spells from one class when you can have the best spells from every class? The ability to cast and maximize scrolls lets us cast multiple high-level spells every single turn, lets us always have the right answer for any problem, and I think is both extremely fun to play, because our strategic considerations will be very different from what you're used to when playing the game, and very on flavor. Seeing a problem and pulling out the right book to answer that problem is such a wizard power fantasy, and the character who has this overstuffed backpack full of scrolls and potions and bottles and stuff, stumbling after the party, getting stuck crossing a bridge or something like that is such an iconic image. You can imagine yourself as like Bilbo Baggins or a similar character, haplessly dragged along for the adventure, but with the library chops to make up for it. And this gives you a solid basis for your character that also happens to be incredibly powerful. For this build, we're going to be trying to make scrolls as strong as possible, so without any further ado, let's get to the build. I'm using the gnome hireling as the example character here because the image of the tiny little gnome with the gigantic overstuffed backpack full of books and scrolls is exactly what I want to go for with this character. I think that's just very funny and very on flavor. But honestly, I think it doesn't matter particularly what race you pick when you're building this character. The normally extremely powerful ones are, of course, extremely powerful for this build. The bonus movement speed from Wood Elf is very useful. The once per day Misty Step from Githyanki is very powerful. And the out-of-combat invisibility from Dwergar is probably the most synergistic, so if you're just looking for the most powerful possible build, Dwergar is probably the way to go. Being able to start combats invisible is just such a huge boost to any spellcaster. It means that you'll be always safe and always positioned exactly where you want to be, so that's probably the strongest pick. Also, characters that get spells known are going to be pretty good as well, because having just more options for spells is pretty nice. So any race that gives you a spell, especially if it's based off of your charisma, is going to be moderately useful for this character as well. Something like Drow can be pretty nice just for the once per day darkness. So there's a lot of options, but mostly you're going to want to pick your race based on flavor. On the other hand, what class we take at level 1 is actually a very interesting question, and one with, I think, a pretty specific answer. Wizard, surprisingly, is not the best class at casting scrolls. In fact, even though Wizard can learn spells from scrolls and so has a lot of scroll-related class features, Wizard gets almost nothing that makes you better at actually casting spells from the scrolls themselves. In order to maximize our scroll casting to the highest extent, there's really two things that we need. One is the correct save DC, and as high a save DC as possible to make sure that enemies are failing our checks. And the second is just the most action economy that we can get. We want to be able to cast as many high-level spells in a turn as possible, because we're not limited by spell slots, we're just limited by the number of scrolls in our backpack. So if we can have 4, 5, 6 actions in a turn, we can cast as many scrolls as we can carry, and basically be as powerful as possible every single turn of every combat. So what we're looking for is classes that give us action economy boosts. There are 3 in the game that do that extremely well, and because we don't have very many restrictions on how on needing to hit specific levels, we don't need to worry about our spell slots or specific class features at later levels because all our power is coming from the items. We can just go ahead and get all of them and boost our action economy to the maximum extent. However, what class we take first is somewhat restricted by a weird quirk of Baldur's Gate 3 and how it calculates spell save DC. The spell save DC for items, scrolls, and illithid powers, so things that are cast from items or from scrolls or illithid powers that your character uses, is based on the casting stat of the most recent class you took your first level in. Not the most recent class you took, but the most recent new class you took. This is very confusing, and I do hope they fix it, but as it stands, in order to have our spells be based on the stat that we want, we need to make our selections so that we take the first level in the class for the spell save DC that we want last. If you don't understand any of that, don't worry about it. You can just follow the leveling order given in this guide, and you will be just fine. Everything will work out fine. In order to do that, I think that the best stat for us to have is going to be Charisma, because that lets this character also be a party face and add a lot of extra utility. So to get Charisma as our save DC stat, later on down the line, we're going to start our build with Fighter. Fighter is a great character class to start this build for anyways, because it gives us heavy armor proficiency and shield proficiency, as well as con save proficiency. Having our saving throw, having Constitution saving throw proficiency lets us maintain concentration on spells more easily, which of course we're going to be concentrating on spells every turn of combat because we have all the best concentration spells in the game, so we don't want to lose concentration. Having heavy armor and a shield lets us clank around in our tin can with our giant backpack full of scrolls, taking very few hits and thus not losing concentration, and also protecting our relatively low hit point total with the best armor and items available. So Fighter is a great start for this character, as well as being required in order to meet the requirements of setting our save DC properly. For our fighting style, we're going to take defense. That makes our armor class even higher, which is great. And for our ability point spread, we are going to take something that looks a little bit unusual for a fighter. We want to use Charisma as our save DC, as our stat for our saves, so we're going to max out Charisma. We're going to take 12 Wisdom just for the highest possible Wisdom saving throws, and we're going to take 16 Constitution for hit points and con saves. Then we're going to take 14 Dexterity, giving us pretty reasonable initiative, which is always nice, and in the early game we'll be able to use our 14 Dexterity plus a bow to fight up until we hit level 3 and get to start using scrolls. That's fine because we won't have stockpiled enough scrolls to actually have them be good in combat, to start using them as our main combat technique until around level 3 anyways. So the fact that we aren't getting our save DC set to Charisma until level 3 won't actually hurt us. For our skill selection here, I think you're going to want to take a background that gives you Persuasion, so that this character can be the party face, because we're going to be Charisma based anyways. Although it would also be funny to only take skills that you could learn in a library, like this gnome's background gives you Arcana and History. Overall, though, we're just going to take the dialogue skills that we have access to, so something like Insight, Intimidation, and then you can grab Persuasion and Deception from, grab Persuasion from a character background, something along those lines, in order to maximize your party face potential with this character. Alright, that's level 1. Let's move on to level 2. At level 2, we are going to take a level of Rogue. This is the other class that we're going to want that isn't Charisma-based casting, so we need to take it second, and Rogue is going to allow us to be pretty effective in combat, even with only 14 Dexterity. You could also just respec to this build at level 3, but, you know, I like the builds to be playable from level 1, thanks to Sneak Attack. And also, it gives us some extra skill expertise and skill proficiencies. If we select Sleight of Hand as our skill known, or got that from a background, then we can also be this party's lockpicking character, which is pretty nice in the vein of just having the answer to every problem. This character can be a lockpicker. You could also think of this character as an artificer or engineer with heavy armor, scroll casting, lockpicking, tool use. That's also a very fun way to flavor this character. And then for our second expertise, you could just take Persuasion if you took that from your background. For this character, I guess I'll just take Intimidation expertise, so we have the best dialogue skill, and we also have our Sleight of Hand expertise, and we can pick locks. And then that's it. Let's move on to level 3. Level 3, we're going to continue our Pokemon collection of all the classes that improve your action economy by taking a level of Sorcerer. We don't yet have any of the features of these classes that really boost your action economy, but Sorcerer is going to give us an extremely powerful one pretty soon, as well as giving us a bunch of spell access and one of the most powerful subclass features in the game. For our Sorcerer subclass, we're going to take Storm Sorcery, because whenever you cast a level 1 spell or higher, including from a scroll, so basically every single turn of combat, we can fly as a bonus action. This lets us reposition freely without receiving opportunity attacks and makes this character incredibly mobile. Storm Sorcery, therefore, synergizes ridiculously well with this character. For our spells known, we're going to want to take ones that are based on reactions, because we won't always have scrolls for those. So Shield is really good, and combined with our heavy armor and shield proficiency, this character is going to be incredibly hard to hit when we have Shield. And remember, we aren't going to be using our spell slots on anything other than these like reactive or defensive spells, so we can take that and have it be really strong. And then you also want spells that are rituals on as actual spells known, because you don't want to be wasting a scroll of a ritual spell when you could just have it known and have it not cost a spell slot to actually cast. So for our second spell here, we're going to take Disguise Self if this character is going to be your party face. You could also take Enhanced Leap, that's another ritual spell, so it doesn't cost a spell slot, and lets you cast that spell without expending a resource. For our cantrip selection, you do want some cantrips to fall back on, but we're going to take Friends and Minor Illusion, because these are very powerful utility cantrips that help you a lot. And then we'll just take a couple combat cantrips to fall back on. Ray of Frost or is the best of these, so we'll probably grab that. Other utility cantrips are good, but I think in this case we're just going to take Bone Chill, so that when we don't want to use a scroll, because every time you use a scroll, of course, it does lower your resources permanently, you will still have something to fall back on. That's our Sorcerer level. Let's move on to level 4. At level 4, we have a choice. Do we want to immediately get our action economy breaking tools as soon as possible, or do we want to try to increase our stats as quickly as we can? I'm going to recommend that we just go ahead and make the build broken as quickly as we possibly can, and we're going to do that by taking a second level of Fighter. Fighter level 2 gets us Action Surge, and that's 2 scrolls per turn once every short rest, which means that we are able to cast 1,000,000 high-level spells right from the beginning of the game. A fighter spamming out multiple high-level spells every turn of every combat is going to be one of the most powerful things that you can do. It's way better than attacking, because you're using some of the highest level possible spells, and at this level you'll probably have found scrolls of spells that are higher level than your party can cast, so you'll be able to cast level 3 or even level 4 spells, depending on what scrolls you've found, at this level, which can give you a real edge over the competition by casting extremely powerful spells in combat, sometimes multiple times per turn. Other than that, though, no decisions to make, so let's go to the next level. And then we're going back to Sorcerer levels, because this gives us Metamagic. Metamagic can be used with scrolls, so we can twin a spell. We can make it extended, we can make it distant. We're going to take distant and twinned. Now, at this level, we only have 2 sorcery points, so it's going to be hard for us to twin high-level spells, because twinned is based on the number of sorcery points. The cost of twinning is based on the level of the spell, and that does count for scrolls. But the fact that you can we can now theoretically cast up to 4 spells in a single turn with Action Surge and double twin spells at level 5 is already pretty ridiculous. And remember, we aren't using our spell slots for anything. We can just turn all of our spell slots into sorcery points and use those for twinning spells or other metamagic features that we're going to get later on. For our spell known, we're going to go ahead and take any other ritual spells that we want, or you could just take something generically strong like Magic Missile or Chromatic Orb to make sure you always have something to do every turn of combat. But I think that one of the fun things about playing this character is actually having to decide when to use scrolls and having to use spells you normally wouldn't use, because that happens to be the scroll that you have. And so I actually like to avoid taking generically powerful spells known on the Sorcerer, so that I have to make myself use the scrolls that I have in creative ways. That's only if you're looking for a little bit of an extra challenge, though. For the strongest possible way to build this character, just grab Magic Missile or Chromatic Orb, because they're just generically powerful. They'll give you something good to do every turn of combat. At character level, or at sorcerer level 3, we get access to Quicken spell, so now we can bonus action cast spells as well. Quickened, again, does work with scrolls, so you can bonus action cast a scroll, you can main action twin 2 scrolls, you can action surge and do it again. That's 5 spells in a single round of combat if you have the resources and are so inclined, although that does mean that you've burned a lot of sorcery points and a lot of spell slots on stacking up more sorcery points in order to be able to do that. For our spell selection here, there's a couple directions that we could go. We could take a generically useful combat spell like Cloud of Daggers to make sure that we always have something to do on our turns. We could take Misty Step as a great panic button. There are scrolls of Misty Step, which you can use just as well, but every character should have access to Misty Step, so it's always useful to know it and just be able to use it whenever you absolutely need it. Or we could go back to level 1 and take one of the utility rituals like Featherfall, just to make sure that our party has access to these without having to spend resources. I'm going to recommend taking Misty Step. It's just never wrong to take Misty Step, and it gives you something that just gives you a panic button. Though, again, your sorcerer spell slots at this level will mostly be being turned into sorcery points to let you cast more spells in a given turn, more scrolls in a given turn, rather than used for actual spells. It can be useful to conserve 1 second level spell slot for Misty Step just in case you have an emergency. It's also worth noting, of course, that because we're a Storm Sorcerer, any spell we cast lets us, any scroll we use lets us bonus action jump our movement speed. So Misty Step is better than that, but that is somewhat redundant with the Storm Sorcery feature and the fact that we have so many scrolls. But still, I think Misty Step is just too good a spell to pass up on. If you're not feeling it, though, you can just grab something powerful like Cloud of Daggers. Alright. At Sorcerer level 4, we get our first feat, and we're just going to increase our Charisma up to 18. We want to maximize our save DCs as much as possible, and every level of Sorcerer we get gets us more sorcery points, so leveling up in Sorcerer to get higher Charisma is good here. We also get to take another cantrip, which gives us another thing that we can do when we don't have any scrolls that are relevant, so we can take a utility spell like Light. We're level 7 now, so we should be somewhere in Act 2, and having Light is pretty good at that point. And then for our spell selection here, again, a ritual, a generically powerful combat spell, or an emergency button like Misty Step, or what you're looking for from this character. We don't have to worry about taking like only utility spells because our save DCs are still charisma based, so we can take spells with save DCs and still have them be strong. At character level 8, we could take another level of Sorcerer, which would get us 2 third-level spell slots, as well as a sorcery point from leveling up in Sorcerer. So effectively 7 more sorcery points in that day. Or we could take a level of Fighter, which if we take Eldritch Knight, does the same thing. We get Eldritch Knight level 3 is a spellcasting level, so this will make us a 5th level spellcaster. We'll get 2 third level spell slots, more hit points, and we get to take a couple more spells. This way we can grab Shield. We already know Shield from our Sorcerer levels, but we'll swap it out in a couple levels anyways. And we can take Magic Missile, which we didn't take from our Sorcerer levels, so that we have these as generically powerful spells that we can always use. And we get to add a couple more cantrips, so we'll pick up more utility cantrips like, say, Blade Ward and Mage Hand. And from our expanded spell list, we're going to take Long Strider, which previously this character didn't have access to as a ritual, but now does, and so you can cover basically all the important ritual spells in a single level. I really like being able to take Eldritch Knight here and still hit our high-level spell slots, because I think, because it's a spellcasting level, you could also take a level of Champion if you wanted to, because that will let you critically hit twice as often on spells with attack rolls. But Eldritch Knight is so nice for this character because it gives you higher level spells immediately, which you can convert to sorcery points, as well as giving you your utility spells, even more utility spells, including Long Strider, one of the few that we didn't have great access to already on this character. At level 9, we have a choice. We can either take a feat, or we can go back into our Sorcerer levels in order to pick up a 5th level spell, and there is a 5th level spell that we really want, but I think maximizing our charisma earlier is going to be better. This way at level 9 we'll have 20 charisma, so we'll be at max charisma, only one level behind a character that's getting it as fast as possible, and this will give us the ability to land our spells much more reliably, as well as, of course, increasing our dialogue skills. It gives us more hit points also, so I just like leveling up in Fighter here, and for our spell selection from Eldritch Knight, it really doesn't matter what we take. All of these are based on... there's only really one choice, because all of these are based on saves, except for Mage Armor, which we could use, but it costs spell slots, so we don't want to spend those. We'll just take Protection from Good and Evil, because there's a couple encounters where this might be useful, but mostly this spell pick isn't relevant. At our next level, we're going to go back into 5th level Sorcerer. Although we could also take our 2nd level of Rogue at this point, but I think 5th level Sorcerer gives us just a little bit more utility at this stage. The reason that 5th level Sorcerer is so good is because it gives us access to Counterspell. Counterspell is one of the few spells that we won't be able to cast from a scroll, because no scrolls of Counterspell exist in the game. They simply don't. Even though we don't have high-level spell slots to use with Counterspell, being able to counter enemy level 3 spells reliably is still really, really powerful, and so I recommend conserving one 3rd level spell slot in order to have Counterspell available. This character can keep like one spell slot of each level and turn the rest into sorcery points, so you always have a shield, you always have a Misty Step, you always have a Counterspell, and then you have as many sorcery points as you need to twin or quicken high-level scrolls if you want to, and that gives you a lot of reactivity as well. This isn't mandatory, and if you feel like you aren't going to use Counterspell or you have it somewhere else in the party, you can just go for the rogue levels immediately, but I think that this is usually going to be the cleanest way to build the character. The rogue levels will also be very good though, so either way will be very strong. And speaking of the rogue levels, at character level 11, we're going to take our 2nd rogue level, which gets us bonus action, dashes, and hides, and disengages. Now, we already effectively have bonus action dash and bonus action disengage because we have Storm Sorcery magic, but bonus action hide is very useful, and on turns where you aren't casting a scroll, this can be very helpful anyways in order to give you a lot more mobility. But the real prize of the rogue levels, and I'm sure everybody saw this one coming, is that we get to take Thief at rogue level 3. Thief gives us an extra bonus action, and what are we using bonus actions for? We're using them to fly. We're using them to quicken spells. So we can now cast 2 quicken spells in a turn, 2 quicken scrolls in a turn if we have sorcery points, and up to 2 twin spells in a turn with action surge, or 3 if we're hasted or have a speed potion. This means we can spam out a ludicrous number of high-level spells in a given round. We could, given enough sorcery points, theoretically cast 8 spells in a single turn, which is a truly remarkable number, and no other character can equal that number of spells cast in a given turn, especially not high-level spells, because we can combine quicken and twinning spells, and we also get to burn all of our sorcery points if we want them, because we don't need our spell slots. We can just turn them all into sorcery points. Unlike other sorcerers who have to actually cast spells using those spell slots, this character gets to turn them all into sorcery points and just spend them on meta magic, which is one of the incredible strengths of the character. Alright, that is the ultimate librarian. We're breaking the action economy every which way from Sunday, and breaking the actual economy because we're going to be using as many scrolls as we can get our grubby little hands on, and this character is both, I think, incredibly powerful and incredibly fun to play. It is very item reliant though, so let's talk about items. For items for this character, obviously we're going to need scrolls, and we're going to need lots of them. We're going to need as many scrolls as we can possibly find. But most importantly, what you're going to need for scrolls is you're going to need a mixture of direct damage spells, or control spells that don't take concentration, and spells that do take concentration. You won't always be able to concentrate on a spell, but you will always be able to cast multiple spells in a turn. So you need to have a mixture of concentration and non-concentration spells. Ideally, you want to collect a decent mixture of spells of every spell level as well, because twinning a spell costs a number of sorcery points equal to the level of the spell, and so if you take spells of multiple different levels, then you will always be able to choose which spells you are twinning based on how many sorcery points you actually want to spend in that turn, because you have the spells available. Some really good spells to keep an eye out for are spells that are powerful control concentration spells, the classic Fear, Hypnotic Pattern, Sleet Storm, and so on, and great damage spells, especially high-level damage spells, because you can't upcast a scroll. A fireball will always be a level 3 fireball on this character, so you are only ever going to be able to cast your damage spells at the level that you find them at. So you really need your damage spells to be high level. Your control spells can be low level ones because they're typically just as good at lower levels as they are at higher levels. Things like Hold Person and so on make excellent scrolls for this character because you can cast them, you can twin cast them or multicast them without having to worry about it, as though you were upcasting it. That was a sort of incoherent sentence. You can twin cast a scroll of Hold Person, which is like upcasting it to level 3. So even though you can't upcast spells of scrolls, you can still gain the benefits of Hold Person Twin Cast or other low-level control spells with twin casting. You can also benefit from the powerful level 3 spells like Fear, Hypnotic Pattern, and so on, Haste, and all of those. And then at higher levels, you want one-shot damage spells because those are going to be already upcast by virtue of just being higher level spells. Obviously, high-level scrolls are always going to be valuable, but it's more important that your damage spells be high level, things like Chain Lightning. Some other scrolls to keep an eye out for are things like Globe of Invulnerability, which just solves any encounters, and situational spells like Evard's Black Tentacles that you wouldn't normally want to spend a spell slot on, but when you have a scroll of it, it can be pretty nice. So keep an eye out for a wide variety of scrolls. Make sure that you have a variety of scrolls at different levels at every time, and that will be the way to power up your character as much as possible. It's also worth paying attention to how you actually buy scrolls, and I think that this character is most fun when you can glitch the economy using like the bag tricks with the merchants, which you can look up if you're interested in them, to get infinite gold. I think this character is actually most fun if you don't glitch the economy and have a limited pool of resources that you're working from. In this save, though, I mean, this is just a normal save where I wasn't collecting scrolls. You can see how many scrolls this party has acquired without even trying, and I think there's a million more in the chest. And so you will have a lot of scrolls, and you can buy low-level scrolls that are very efficient. In particular, third-level scrolls are the most efficient to spend your gold on because they're the highest power level spells in the game and will always be relevant to cast, and they're very efficient when twin cast or quickened because they use your sorcery points pretty efficiently. It's also worth noting that quickening a high-level spell is more efficient than twinning it, so you're going to want to quicken your scrolls of 6th-level spells, like a Quicken Chain Lightning, rather than twinning your scrolls of high-level spells, and then twin your scrolls of low-level spells to maximize your sorcery points. For Worn gear for this character, there's only 2 things that you care about, and that is spell save DC and initiative. This character doesn't get alert by default, although you could use Ethel's Hair or something like that to give you room to take alert. So initiative gear is really important on this character, and spell save DC, of course, we're a spellcaster, so you want as much save DC as possible. Things like the Fistbreaker Helm and Ketheric's Shield are really important. Because we have our spell saves set to Charisma, this character is also an excellent user of Mark Heshkir and other items with bound spells, so that can give you a lot of additional utility, and any item that has a spell that you can cast from it is worth considering on this character. Those sometimes can be twinned or quickened and sometimes can't. It depends on the individual item, but for the most part, they will be able to benefit from all of our action economy breaking tricks and can really power up both your longevity in a given adventuring day and your economic longevity over the long term, because you aren't spending gold every time you cast a spell from an item, which you are every time you cast a scroll. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and as always, if you have, feel free to leave a comment. This is a really fun one, so I'm interested. I think this is a really fun one, and it's a very different take on the game, so I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on this build, whether you're interested in more builds like this that focus on an unusual aspect of the game as well. And of course, if you have liked this build, or my videos in general, you can feel free to subscribe or support my channel with the buttons below the video, and I really appreciate everyone who takes the time to do that. Cheers, my friends. I'll catch you next time.